Singularity.
My name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and you're watching Singularity One-on-One. Singularity One-on-One is a regular podcast feature of Singularity Weblog, where you can go and listen to it or download it in full. If you guys enjoyed the show, you can help me make it better in one of several ways. You can leave a review on iTunes, you can leave a comment on YouTube, you can click the like button, or you can simply make a donation. As always, I will be the man with the questions, and today my guest with the answers will be Stelarc. Stelarc is a world-renowned body installation visual artist who has pushed the boundaries with his performances for the last 4 decades. So, welcome to Singularity One-on-One, Stelarc.
Thanks, Nicola.
I am very, very happy to have you on this show. I have to admit that I remember in my master's degree, actually, I was looking at some of your art, and I have had you on my future guest list, ever since I started this show. So I'm finally, now that you're finally here, I'm very happy about this.
Excellent.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation. Let me ask you first, if you were to introduce yourself and what you do in a couple of sentences, how would you do it? What's the best way?
Well, I guess I'm best described as a performance artist who's interested in exploring alternate anatomical architectures. You know, I've been fascinated by the sort of evolutionary structures of, you know, from humans to mammals to insects, and how those different architectures enable us to become aware and operate in the world in such different ways. So, yes, I've also been involved in installation work, some interactive installations, but best described as a performance artist. So I guess as an artist, I'm interested in not only speculating on ideas, but actually engineering an interface, personally experiencing it, and thereby having something meaningful to say.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this then. What was your first love? Was it art or was it technology? Because you kind of mix the two of them in your performances.
Well, I guess I discovered early on in art school that I was a bad painter. So becoming a performance artist wasn't really an option. I had to pursue that direction. But, you know, I was always envious of dancers, singers, gymnasts, people who use their bodies not only as a means of expression, but also as a mode of experiencing directly their ideas. So that was the connection initially with the body and the interest and envy of other bodies who could better express themselves. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us perhaps the story of how, in a way, you decided to extrude the physical body with your own performances? Is there a story behind that, and why? It seems to me kind of like your whole career is really focused on that.
Well, there's always been an oscillation of concerns. You know, we're increasingly expected to perform in mixed realities, we're often, of course, purely biological bodies, increasingly augmented and accelerated by our machines and enhanced by our instruments, but increasingly also we're having to manage data streams in virtual systems. So we have to kind of seamlessly slip between these modes of operation, between the biological, the machinic, and the virtual. And so those oscillations of concern have always been a part of my practice. So it's never simply been a linear progression from the physically difficult to the technically complex, you know, to the virtual presence of the recent performances. And also not being constrained by a particular medium means that, you know, I'm happily performing with a six-legged walking robot and then suspending my body using hooks into the skin. I mean, you discover aspects of your body that you know, you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But to me, what's really interesting to find out is, like, I mean, it makes sense in a way to do what you do today in our current reality. And yet you were doing it since the late 70s, early 80s on a regular basis. So for 35, 40 years. So doing it today, I think is kind of like almost obvious in the context of our reality. But doing it 40 years ago is like revolutionary. It's visionary. So I'm very curious to find out, how did you decide to make that connection in the 1970s?
Yeah, well, actually, it was in the late 60s.
Oh, wow.
Maybe I'm showing my age or not showing it as much. But, yeah, no, I mean, the first thing I made in art school of significance for me were helmets and goggles that altered your binocular perception, and an immersive, rotating, interactive environment for the body. So, you know, those works were done in the late 60s, and there was, you know, there was not a kind of a deliberate strategy to go in any one direction. There was never a blueprint that I simply realized. Rather, you had certain concerns. Of course, there were bodily constraints. How do you extend and extrude the body with technology and the internet? So that generated particular projects and performances, and then iterations of those concerns proliferated and in a sense, rhizomatically generated these more recent works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a little bit different question that may or may not be connected with this topic. Now, I think it was in the early 70s that you changed your name to Stelarc. Why did you do that, and what does Stelarc stand for?
Yeah, it was actually since 1970, I think 72 was the year that the name was legally changed. And in fact, recently I was part of an exhibition called Super Connect in Taiwan, and the curator there decided, well, you know, I mean, I've always used the name Stelarc in all of my communications with them, but the curator assumed that hey, I had a real name, found it out by maybe Googling or reading up on books, and then sent me an airline ticket with the name Stellius Arcadiu on it, a name that hasn't existed. And, you know, my passport, the name is just Stelarc, my credit cards, driver's license, all of my ID, there's only one name on there, Stelarc.
Wow.
And in fact, I had that problem some years ago when an American curator did the same thing, and I turned up at the airport and they wouldn't let me on the plane. My passport name didn't match the name on the ticket. So, you know, it's proved to be a problem. And here at the university, at Curtin University, they're insisting, you know, in my designation online, that my name appears as Stelarc. because they insist that they can't fill their computer fields without a first name. And I tried to get this changed recently, and they're insisting that, it has to stay Stelarc. So, if you telephone me and I say hello, don't be surprised.
That's very interesting, but going back to the issue, what does it stand for, and why change it in the first place?
Yeah, it doesn't stand for anything really. It's really taking the first few letters of each name and putting them together to make a shorter name. Stelarc Arcadia is originally Greek. Both my parents are from Cyprus, and but I grew up in Australia, and I had an urge early on in my sort of student life that I needed to simplify my name. Everyone was shortening my name anyway, so I decided to legally do it. There's no particular meaning behind it, no significance. I really don't think in that way. It was a somewhat pragmatic decision on my part, just to make it easier on everyone, except in the last 15 years, it's been really difficult with, the proliferation of computer technology and computer fields with institutions and museums.
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked that first you were able to change it only to one name instead of three names, because I imagine nowadays in a world where basically computers dictate the empty spaces that you need to fill in order to do anything or get anywhere. I mean, does that say anything about our civilization, that computers dictate, well, there's an empty blank, form here that you haven't filled in, therefore we can't issue you a check, or we can't issue you a ticket, or whatever?
Well, I think it is symptomatic of our sort of computer and online existence. But your ID signifiers, of course, have to fit in with the certain constraints of computer sort of designations. But of course, that also results in being easily hacked as well, and your ID stolen. So it is an interesting symptom of our sort of programmed existence these days. But it doesn't bother me so much. It's a nuisance value. As our world is getting increasingly complex, you can't have complexity without constraints, increasing constraints. So if we want to live in a complex and very information-rich domain of interactivity, we're going to have to expect certain rules and regulations within this terrain of operation that we have to function in.
Let me throw in a couple of audience questions here. So, Khalil Kassem asks, I'm curious to know what inspires Stelarc to create the robotic inventions often integrated in his performances. Well,
initially it was prosthetic attachments to the body. So, do you accept the present biological status quo, or perhaps, does a third hand or an extra ear or a virtual arm enable you, to have some additional interactive capabilities? It's not about improving the anatomical kind of architecture of the body, because I think that's just a value judgment anyway. But I think the idea of experiencing the alternate, experiencing the other, how other perceptual and operational architectures interact with the world. That's what's interesting. But being also intrigued by insect and animal locomotion, then, for example, performing with exoskeleton, the six-legged insect-like robot structure, robust enough to support the artist's body, translating the artist's bipedal gait into this six-legged insect-like locomotion. That in itself is both a formal and an anatomical outcome of that particular performance. So that's the sort of general desire, really, to experience alternate possibilities, whether they be robotic, whether they push the biological boundaries of the body. That's also involved with this present project of surgically constructing and stem cell growing an ear on my arm. So all of these attempts have been attempts at actualizing ideas so that you can personally experience them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So would it be fair to say that the goal of your work is to, as you said, expanded possibilities?
Yes, without using the kind of philosophically problematic sort of social engineering kinds of terminology of enhancement and improvement. For example, a lot of interesting prosthetic interfaces are for differently enabled people, for people who may have been born with genetic problems or have had some sort of traumatic accident, catastrophic accident, and their bodies have, can't function the way they used to. They might be paralyzed. They might be blind. Of course, some people are quite comfortable with their particular conditions. Deaf people don't necessarily want to hear. Blind people don't necessarily want to see. We don't necessarily have to normalize or what we consider normal operational capabilities with these differently enabled people. On the other hand, yes, it's intriguing that this particular body might have an extra ear on its arm that it can hand over to other people, that becomes a kind of a remote listening device for people in other places. This extra ear is not for my body. I mean, I've got two good ears to hear with. It's more a transmitting device. It's more a remote listening device for others. So that's the sort of general kind of attitude that the artist has. It's not about sort of eugenically enhancing or improving the human body or making value judgments about how that body might be improved. But certainly this body is willing to experience any kind of interface that provides unexpected information and images, to my cerebral cortex.
Let me grab a couple of words that you use there, because they're highly interesting for me, because they're usually the words associated with transhumanism. So you said that you're trying to experience expanded possibilities without those philosophically problematic value judgments of enhancement and improving, which, as I said, are usually associated with transhumanism. So I've seen often people calling you a transhumanist artist, and yet I watched a couple of occasions where you yourself said that you're not a transhumanist. Can you tell us a little bit more about that interplay?
Well, it's not that I'm unhappy that that say people in the transhumanist movement, you might call it that, relate to what I do and perhaps interpret it in ways that sync with their philosophical trajectory. On the other hand, as an individual artist who's not really concerned about kind of dogmas or pursuing, particular beliefs. I think one always has to be open to possibilities, rather than to be constrained by particular positions, or directed by particular positions. That's all. I think as artists, we're really in the business of generating contestable futures, possibilities that can be examined. Often these would be discarded. Sometimes they might be appropriated. Mm-hmm. So that's the general approach.
But isn't that in a way
possibilities?
But isn't that in a way what sort of improvement is all about, or progress is all about? You take certain kinds of experiments, you test them, you see the results, and then you either discard or you adopt those. And then it's a process of cumulative change, which basically each consequent change is built on top of the previous one.
And that's an excellent way of articulating what's happening. It's just when it becomes a political issue, it's a problem when it becomes a social engineering imperative. I think we constantly have to factor contingency mm-hmm. into our speculations, rather than generate theories that seemingly are about necessity. If you want to imagine a future, any future, you have to factor the unpredictable. Otherwise, it's not a future. The whole notion of what a future is about the unpredictable, is about the contestable, is about contingency, rather than necessity. And in fact, that's probably what determines our humanity as well, largely. But I think the problem with any kind of specific pronouncements about the future, whether it's to do with the transhumanists, whether it's in fact to do with the singularity, these are all very seductive, mm-hmm. Undoubtedly most seductive, because often there's information, there's data that seemingly substantiates those speculations. Mm-hmm. And certainly some of those speculations will unfold into actualities, will collapse into actualities. Mm-hmm. But I see no necessity in anything happening. And in fact, even if you consider our recent history, there have been certain quite unexpected possibilities that have resulted. For example, nanotechnology. 50, 60, 70 years ago, the speculations now generated by nanotechnology, nanofabrication, nanosensors, nanorobots, just would not have been possible, almost quite inconceivable. Technology which was always external to the body now can in fact recolonize the human body, augmenting our bacterial and viral populations. What we need is more surveillance, but surveillance of the inside of our human bodies. And what nanosensors, what nanobots will do will be to provide those early alert warning symptoms. At the moment, until you feel the lump in your chest, it's too late. Mm-hmm. And of course, at a cellular level, your body is probably detecting these pathological changes in chemistry and temperature and blockages in the circulatory system. Unfortunately, though, the body can't always manage to overcome these. And so unless we have an early alert warning system that resides inside the body, in other words, can we rewire the body inside out? Can we redesign the human body atoms up? When we can do that, then that's going to be, I think, the best strategy for increasing the longevity of the body, for increasing the body's robustness, for protecting the body against certain pathologies.
But isn't that what transhumanism is all about?
Well, it's certainly an aspect of transhumanism, and as I said, I'm quite comfortable to be considered within that general realm of ideas. But I'm not a transhumanist in the sense that I'm propounding and philosophizing and politicizing and making transhumanism or any other idea one of political and social consequence as such. I think the best approach is that the individual has a choice, and that is factored into any future structures of redesigning the body. I mean, I think the body modification community is a good model for this.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to understand here is what part am I missing here? Like, in the sense that I thought that transhumanism is really about personal choice. In other words, you can be a transhumanist and you can be an Amish if you choose so. And we can live side by side. So that's where the personal choice comes from. Do you think that's not a possibility, or?
I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. I think just as there are lots of checks and balances in how things come about, the scientific community is a good model for that. It's not the only model, but it's a good model. Mm-hmm. That you can have any theory you want, but it's only a meaningful theory if that theory stands up to experiments by others and their outcomes kind of match yours. And if you can do this in a realm of contingency, in a realm of personal choice, that's fine. Having said that, personal choice does not necessarily mean that I'm a proponent of free will in the traditional metaphysical sense. The more and more performances I do, the less and less I think I have a mind of my own, nor any mind at all in the traditional metaphysical sense. Mm-hmm. In other words, what you're looking at is a speaking body, a body that is responding to your queries, a body that is soft to the touch, a body that is aging, a body that interacts and inhabits certain institutions. That's what you have before you. There is nothing inside this body in the kind of metaphysical way that Platonic, Cartesian, and even Freudian constructs of the body have imagined. There's nothing. The only thing that's inside this body is soft and squishy tissue, a circulation system, a nervous system, a neuronal machinery that allows this body to interact with other bodies, in this language, in this particular set of institutions, culturally conditioned at this point in time in history. This is how this body is framed. This is how this body is constrained. So this body certainly has a choice, but this choice has to be understood within a much more complex interactive system of other living things, instruments and machines, institutions and culture, and particular moments in our history.
So in other words, you are an inherent, almost inseparable part of the environment you are a part of. And yes, you may have some choice, but it's within that context is kind of perhaps more minor compared to the major interactivity of you and your environment and its impact on that body.
Yes, I mean, I can imagine that I can pick up my cup of coffee now and take a sip of it, and this is my choice in doing it. There's physiological reasons. I'm feeling thirsty. I'm feeling hungry. That might prompt me to do this. Also, it's a sort of a situation that's been framed by you sending me an email and arranging this Skype at this particular moment, which prompted me to purchase this cup of coffee before I spoke to you, because I probably wouldn't have had time afterwards and it wouldn't have been convenient. But anyway, you can see what I mean, yes. That the choice to take a sip of coffee now, has a series of reasons for me doing so that go beyond my simplistic idea of choosing to do so. That's not belittling the human. It's not belittling our interactive moment of communication. It's just simply trying to understand that these things happen for a complex and interactive set of reasons that go beyond this particular individual.
Let me go back a little bit here and talk a little more about art. Perhaps I should start with a paraphrase of a question by one of my viewers, Jacob Orzwelski, who said something of the sort, I don't want to be insulting, but why in the world is this called art? I mean, most stuff that I can find on the internet by Stelarc looks nothing like art. So what do you want to say to that?
Yeah, no, look, I can understand that response. And one has to remember that, just as I don't understand subatomic particle physics, I might have a general knowledge of it. I don't understand it. If you tell me that a quark has charm and has spin, I can take your words literally, your description literally. I don't really understand that from the point of view of physics. We don't expect that people who have not been trained in the arts, that are not knowledgeable in postmodern discourse, that aren't familiar with contemporary art practice, could necessarily understand that what I do, for example, might be termed art. Well, firstly, to try to explain that to your listener, artistic expression, which often has been about self-examination, say in the history of portraiture, the expression of ideals, whether they're religious or philosophical, from the medieval to the Enlightenment period, different mediums of expression have been used by artists, and from carving to casting to ceramics to oil painting to fresco painting to the more contemporary multimedia approaches of that you find in installations, and also say with Jean Tinguely, who earlier made machine sculptures, mechanical kind of monsters that kind of whirred and clicked and also were kind of clumsy drawing machines, to now artists who are using artificial intelligence, that are using state-of-the-art robotics, that are using the internet, that are using surgical techniques, that are using tissue engineering. These are the contemporary mediums of expression that artists are using. And why should artists be interested in using these new mediums of expression? Because they generate new performative experiences, because they generate new information and unexpected images of the human body. So, for example, an MRI scan, you can have cross-sectional images of the human body. You can inspect a living body anatomically in ways that you couldn't inspect it before. So previously you would have to be a dead body to be dissected. And for people to see a cross-sectional image of your body. Now, of course, we can do this electronically, non-evasively, in non-harmful ways. And this is interesting. I mean, in the near future, of course, and this is already happening, with stem cell growing of organs, or the possibility of stem cell growing organs, of the possibility of bioprinting organs. I mean, we'll be able to replace malfunctioning parts of our bodies much more easily. It would be better, though, if we had a more modular design of this analog body to more easily replace malfunctioning components. But that's another issue in terms of our anatomical architecture. But that would be my question. Of course, that doesn't necessarily make it interesting art. It doesn't necessarily make it good art that you're simply using artificial intelligence or tissue engineering as your medium of expression. But artists are very curious creatures, and they will adopt technologies and look at virtual reality, for example, as well, where you can construct, and artists have constructed immersive, artificial, virtual spaces that other people can navigate and that other people can experience. And so why paint an oil painting, which is a flat image that's stuck on a screen with limited interactivity, when you can engineer a virtually immersive online space, for example, in Second Life, where you as your avatar can visit and experience a three-dimensional artificial world.
So Another cotangent, perhaps, angle on this would be sort of the shock factor, if there is any, intended or unintended, or what some people even call the creep factor. I was discussing some of your work with a friend of mine, and I showed them some of the suspension performances, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is creeping me out a little bit." So is that a sort of a byproduct, or is that intended to sort of shock and surprise?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak about other artists, and I think one has to recognize that some art is messy, some art is pornographic, some art is shocking, some art is traumatic. Mm-hmm. Some art, on the other hand, is minimal. Some art is conceptual. Some art is body art. Now, the problem with body art, of course, is that if you have a challenging idea, to actualize that sometimes means that you have to undergo physical difficulty. I mean, I can have an idea of suspending my body, but then this body has to endure 18 hooks stuck into its skin. It has to support its 68 kilogram body weight for a certain time in trying circumstances on an outcrop of rocks 300 meters from shore at the seaside, 30 meters high, suspended from a giant crane. Anyway, you get the idea. So yes, some of these performances have been difficult. But the sort of creepy factor, or actually brings up this idea of the uncanny valley in robotics, mm-hmm. because as we engineer increasingly more human-like robots, then they seemingly become creepy. In other words, just as you get them to look more and more human. So initially they're seductively human-like in appearance, but then if they respond somewhat asynchronously, if they develop a repetitive twitch, if they don't quite understand what you've said, then actually the increasingly human-like appearance can in fact be quickly undermined, and you have this uncanny valley, this moment of creepiness that results. My answer to that is, well, this might result in a creepy robot, but I also know a lot of creepy people too. Humans can be equally creepy, as your listener kind of alluded to. But I think this creepiness might be the result of lack of comprehension about the circumstance and situation, the lack of technical sophistication, which might be the result of the inability at this point in time in our technology to fully engineer a synchronous and completely human simulation of a body. So I don't take offense to that. On the other hand, there are reasons, both in terms of cognition and in terms of, state-of-the-art technology, which will generate that creepy feeling mm-hmm. in others. Mm-hmm. But there's no deliberate attempt with this artist to shock people. Mm-hmm. It might be an outcome, but that's not the intention. It's not the intention of this artist to harm this body. It's not the intention of this artist to shock an audience.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you then about the intention behind the third ear.
Well, it was originally imaged as an ear on the side of my head. So if I turned in one direction, I would have one ear, but if I turned in the other direction, there would be two ears. But this was not an anatomically safe place, and probably conceptually it wasn't the way to go either. But with increasing communication with surgeons and medical practitioners, with a further refinement conceptually of this idea of an extra ear, a safe location happened to be on my arm, on my forearm. There, the skin is thin, flexible. In fact, that skin is very sensitive and very ear-like skin. So that was the location that was chosen in the end to construct the ear on my forearm. But, you know, the description of this project has been very misleading and embarrassingly for the artist, because any medical practitioner reading some of these descriptions would say, well, this is nonsense medically and surgically. So how this was done was the skin initially was expanded. There was an inflating prosthesis that was inserted in my forearm. Twice a week for 2 months, I self-injected with sterile saline solution. As the prosthesis fills with liquid, it stretches the skin, producing a pocket of excess skin that can assist in the construction of the ear. There were complications. I won't go into the complications at the moment. We can talk about those later if you want. Then a scaffold sculpted out of biomaterial, so it's not my own cartilage, which was the initial intention, but that would have meant an additional surgery under general anesthesia to harvest cartilage from my thorax, and I just couldn't convince the surgeons who was assisting me to do that in addition. They said, well, look, there's biomaterial that can be used for this. It's a porous biomaterial, so once it's inserted beneath the skin of the arm, once the skin is suctioned over the scaffold, which provides the basic structure, over a period of 6 months, what this encourages is tissue ingrowth and vascularization to occur. So this ear on my arm is now part of my arm, physiologically part of my arm, and it has grown its own blood supply. It's not removable. I did not stitch an ear on my arm. I did not implant an ear in my arm. What has happened is that, or the best way of describing this ear is that it is partly surgically constructed, partly cell-grown. It's only a relief of an ear at the moment, but the plan is to lift the helix of the ear to construct an ear flap and to grow a soft earlobe using my adult stem cells. When the ear is a fully three-dimensional structure, then we will reinsert the small microphone that used to be in the ear, connected to a wireless transmitter and a microprocessor, so that in any Wi-Fi hotspot, the ear becomes internet-enabled. So if you're in Toronto and I'm in Perth, you'll be able to listen in to what my ear is hearing, or wherever you are, wherever I am, online.
Very interesting. Now, you said there were complications, and I know that, and I've been planning to ask you, because it seems you've been taking you said the goal of this artist is not to harm this body. And yet you are taking certain serious risks occasionally. And as far as I know, you did have an infection at some point. So how do you balance these two?
Well, of course, you try to plan adequately. But there's a point in time when, all this planning and thinking has to stop, and you have to try to actualize the idea. Now, this project was done with 3 excellent plastic surgeons. So all precautions were taken. But, for example, there's no guarantee that a problem will not occur. The first problem occurred in the stretching of the skin. I was in Melbourne at the time, and the surgeons who were assisting me were in the States. One at the time came from Los Angeles, one was from Pittsburgh, and the other one was Austin, Texas. So we communicated during this 2 month of skin expansion, primarily by email, and it seemed to be going okay. The skin would blanch when the injections were done, but by lightly rubbing and also, minutes or hours later, the skin would regain its colour. But towards the end of the skin expansion, it seemed as if we were doing it a little too rapidly. And one morning I woke up, and instead of the skin looking blanched, it darkened. About a dollar-sized coin that was about the size of that area. In fact, that patch of skin became necrotic.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I had managed to kill off a part of my body.
Wow.
Now, of course, I quickly got in touch with the surgeons, and everyone was very calm about it. And as long as that necrotic patch of skin stayed on my arm and didn't kind of pop off, it was okay, because soon we were going to proceed with the next surgical process. And anyway, fortunately, that was overcome. In the second surgery, where we actually constructed the ear, inserting the scaffold, they were able to excise that necrotic bit of skin and stitch the ear into my arm, or the ear scaffold, I should say, into my arm without any further problem. Mm-hmm. But several weeks after the second surgery, and partly due to the microphone that was inserted into the ear construct, an infection occurred. Now, it wasn't a rejection; it was an infection. Every time you have a surgery in a hospital, and this is done in a private clinic, there's 10% chance that you might have an infection of some sort. Mm-hmm. So, and this turned out to be somewhat serious. I mean, I almost lost an arm for an ear. Certainly I almost lost the ear construct. But fortunately, there was a colleague in Melbourne, a colleague of one of the surgeons in Los Angeles, who agreed to try to retrieve the ear construct. I spent a week in hospital. Every hour on the hour, my ear construct was flushed with sterile saline solution to try to flush out the infection. And for 6 months, I was on industrial strength antibiotics. And at the end of that period, had we not been successful in stabilizing the construct, it would have meant the end of the ear-on-arm project, because the only way to guarantee removing any infection would have been to have removed the construct altogether. Mm-hmm. So that's how it unfolded. But of course, as I said, you don't do anything without taking some kind of risk, but you try to plan things as adequately as you can, and then you do it.
Well, clearly you've been willing to take a lot of risk, because at some point you probably would have been able to remove it, but you didn't want to abandon the project and lose the ear construct. So you're clearly willing to take risks for your art and suffer the pain of flushing it on the hour and take industrial strength antibiotics for 6 months. So that says a lot, I think. I am an early adopter of technology myself. I build my own computers. I install the latest operating system when I can. I install the latest programs. But when it comes to my body, I'm a total coward. I am absolutely scared to test anything unless it's been proven to be safe by many, many others before that. Even though I consider myself to be a transhumanist, I am not an early adopter of biotech. So how do you square that early adopter risk? And you're not even early adopter, you're totally experimental.
Well, I wouldn't expect most people to jeopardize their body in any way. And I sincerely do not think that that's what I'm doing in these projects and performances. I think you take a risk in anything you do. I mean, increasingly our bodies are accelerated, whether it's in personal machines or other bits of equipment. Our bodies are in jeopardy every time we get into a car, we fly to another country. Accidents can happen. Mm-hmm. So I think the problem is, do you want to be risk aversive in everything you do? Yes, I mean, there have been instances where, of course, you can take every precaution that you can imagine. You can be a safe driver. You can.
Well, I'm not risk averse to everything I do, but my biology is like one of those things that I don't want to mess around.
Yes, and I don't blame you. As I said, this body does not, wish to jeopardize, its very existence by doing something foolish. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I have to admit that my career has been a career of failure. There's nothing that I've done that turns out exactly as I imagined it. Mm. But unless you take chances, unless you're operating in a realm of the unexpected, you're probably not doing something that's interesting. In this case, it's with this particular body. In your case, it might be with your technologies, with your mode of operation and interaction with other people. Mm-hmm. I guess I lead a fairly normal personal existence, for example. But artistically, I'm challenged by certain ideas that I want to actualize. Mm-hmm. And if that means, taking a physical risk, I do this, but only within, certain limitations.
Mm-hmm. So let me try and wrap up this topic here with this question. Does this mean, do you think that the body is obsolete?
In asserting the obsolescence of the body, I'm certainly not asserting the obsolescence of embodiment. To be an intelligent agent, we have to be both embodied and embedded in the world. Mm-hmm. So whether we're embodied as carbon chemistry, soft tissue, muscle and bone bodies, or whether we're embodied as robots or as avatars, there needs to be some kind of embodiment and some kind of embeddedness in an interactive system for intelligence, for operation and awareness to be generated. This body is obsolete in the sense that with these limited functions, with this particular longevity, with this form, with this carbon chemistry, with this necessity to gulp air, and with this necessity to have a beating heart. In other words, we're as much an entity that generates its own death as experience its own liveliness. I guess one thing that's fascinating is this idea of what constitutes aliveness, aside from the particular medium of embodiment. In other words, what vocabularies of behavior would a human have, would a robot have, would an avatar have to be experienced as an alive, responsive, capable of acting upon unpredictable and changing circumstances. That's what's intriguing. Not necessarily that it has to happen in a human body. How might it happen in machines? I mean, if a machine is soft to the touch, if it looks human, if it speaks appropriately, if it has all of the social mores and graces, if it can communicate with me effectively, do I need to cut open its head to indicate whether it's alive or not, or whether it's a biological entity or a machine entity? There'll be a point in time where it will no longer be meaningful to ask whether this intelligent entity is either biological or machinic. Just as much as we don't like to distinguish between a young body or an old body, or a body of a different race, or to be a body of a different embodiment will no longer be meaningful either. Mm-hmm. So it generates interesting aesthetics, but also ethical issues of concern. at what level of intelligent interactivity might a machine be considered, at the same level as a human body, and have the same rights and have the same social and political expectations? They're interesting issues to consider.
It also brings me to my next question, which is, what's your take on the technological singularity?
Okay. Well, I also think that the singularity is a most seductive and kind of logical or rational projection of a particular state of information and technological technological experiences that we now have. As I said, if someone's trying to convince me that the singularity is either a necessity or an absolute eventuality, I would have to be skeptical.
Well, Werner Vinge says that falling short of any major global catastrophe like nuclear war, for example, he thinks that chances are within the next 20 or 30 years we are likely, very likely, almost guaranteed, falling short of that, catastrophe, to actually live and experience that event.
Look, I don't think. Well, of course, in kind of the singularity is seductive because it seemingly will come at a certain point in time and will happen very quickly and will be an eventuality that, to a certain degree, I'm trying to articulate this in a way that I'm as much a part of this process of exploring new hybridities of bodies, machines, and virtual systems.
Absolutely.
But if we unless we ignore history altogether, what's always been the case has been unexpected developments, not necessarily catastrophic ones, but unexpected incremental developments which will always shift and alter the ratios of interactivity between bodies and machines and instruments and computers. The future will be a boring place if the singularity is the outcome in the way that it is now speculated, because I would hope that the future will generate unexpected data, unexpected technologies, unexpected outcomes.
And if the past is any predictor, then chances are we would have that unexpectedness occur.
Well, yes, but I don't necessarily. I want to be open to that as well. I don't necessarily say, well, hey, this is really not going to happen because the future is unexpected. No, I don't want to say that, because, all the data we now have, the exponential quickening of computer processing, power and speed, everything points to some very, very kind of dramatic unfoldings in relationships between bodies and machines. But does this happen in a kind of sci-fi dystopian scenario where suddenly machines take over, or an artificial intelligence is generated that makes bodies completely completely meaningless in the kind of in our meanings of life and on this planet? I'm not sure about that. Mm-hmm. I'd like, and also it's not a scary scenario for me. Mm-hmm. It's not a scary scenario. I think with every new technology, as Paul Virilio would say, there's a new kind of accident. But that's okay. It's in accidents that we generate new possibilities. It's in failures that we see the possibilities of alternate outcomes. So, yes, I'm as much seduced by the singularity as any person interested in technology would be. Do I think it's an imperative? It's something that happens of necessity? I'm not sure about that. Mm-hmm. And I would like to imagine that what transhumanists and people propagating ideas of the singularity are doing are generating contestable futures. Mm-hmm. Contestable futures that can be examined, that, as I said, most likely will be discarded. Sometimes certain ideas, certain outcomes will be appropriated, but we should always be open to possibilities and certainly factor in contingency as part of that interactive system of possibilities that we're generating now within the technological terrain that we now inhabit. But, of course, it's quite apparent that as this terrain of technology becomes more complex, we should not be scared of increasing surveillance and a proliferation of constraints and controls, because we will not be able to safely navigate this very complex and safely and meaningfully navigate this more complex terrain of technological operation without these increasing constraints and conditions.
Mm-hmm. The usual two questions that I ask at the end of every interview that I do are the following. The first one is, where can people find more about you and your work?
Well, there's not a lot of literature. MIT Press, I think in 2005, produced a publication. It's just titled Stelarc, the Monograph, but don't be fooled by the subtitle. It's actually a collection of essays with diverse critiques of the artist's work. They're not all positive. Mm-hmm. We chose them and we invited people because we knew that they would provide a very different evaluation of what this artist is doing. There's my website, Stelarc.org, www.stelarc.org. And you're met with a blank page. Don't be fooled. On the bottom right-hand corner, if you click on the text, it'll flip over pages and you'll get to the projects and performances, and then you can click to particular works that you might be interested in. And there have been other books written that my work has been a part of. The Parables of the Virtual by Brian Masumi. There's a chapter on my work there which covers both an examination of the suspension performances into the work with the third hand. Joanna Zelinska has published several books that have included my works as well. So, yeah, not a lot of stuff, but certainly if you Google the internet, you'll be able to find articles and the publications and authors that I mentioned who've done particular critiques on my work. And
there's lots of video clips of your past performances and lectures and presentations by you, which I highly recommend.
Yeah. And, of course, embarrassingly so. Because, of course, some of those video clips, of course, are taken by someone with an iPhone at the back of the room and the quality is not so great. Some of them, of course, have been posted by myself for institutions or museums and they are of better quality. Of course, some go back a long time. And I've probably said things that I've regretted. But, of course, part of being open to new ideas and new possibilities, of course, means that you do adjust your thoughts. You do, extend and unfold and unpack initial ideas that were fairly rudimentary and need further explanation or need further clarification. So, yeah, but and sometimes actually you're critiqued by people who cite works that were produced by an artist in his early 20s. And being now 67 years old, I would have changed, extended and adjusted a lot of those initial ideas. Although, of course, you can see where I was coming from in those early interviews or early clips.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. We've been talking with you for about an hour and 10 minutes now. Is there one thing that you would like that people take away more than anything else from this interview with you? What's the most important message that you want to send out?
Well, I guess it's not a message, but I guess there is an articulation of what's happening now. I think we are in a time of circulating flesh, where the blood in my body might be circulating in your body tomorrow if you're O positive, where an organ from this body might be operational and animating someone else's body, where we can stitch the limbs from cadavers onto other bodies and manipulate them and manipulate with them, where a skin cell from an impotent male can be engineered into a sperm cell, and more interestingly, a skin cell from a female body might become a sperm cell, which would sort of males would be out of the reproductive loop. But not only are we in a realm of circulating flesh, but we're also in a realm of fractal flesh and phantom flesh, where bodies and bits of bodies spatially separated but electronically connected can generate recurring patterns of interactivity at varying scales. And also I can perform as my avatar, and especially now with the proliferation of haptic devices, there'll be a more potent physical presence of that avatar and of remote bodies elsewhere. So this age of circulating flesh, fractal flesh, and phantom flesh is a realm that we have to now manage and inhabit. Look, about a year and a half ago, the first turbine heart was inserted into a body. Now, a turbine heart is interesting because it's much smaller, much more robust and reliable than previous artificial hearts.
And it doesn't have a pulse, I think.
And it doesn't have a pulse. So in the future, you might put your head on your loved one's chest. They're warm to the touch. They're breathing. They're certainly alive, but they have no heartbeat. So this kind of act, this prosthetic implant, would radically redefine what a body is and how a body operates. Our body has these rhythms, these beats, these circadian brain waves. But perhaps, future bodies may not function in the same sort of rhythmic ways that our bodies function now, with the same hormonal ebb and flows or adrenal ebbs and flows. This might generate new kinds of more stable and robust bodies, but they also might engineer bodies that don't have the emotions that we associate with being human. Does this worry me? Not necessarily. It would certainly be interesting to be a body without a heartbeat, to be a body that doesn't have circadian brain waves, that a body doesn't scream and shout, that a body doesn't flush red and become aggressive and angry. On the other hand, we might poetically justify these emotional ebbs and flows with our creative input. I don't necessarily accept that as a premise. And I'm sure that machines will be equally as creative, but hopefully in unexpected and very different ways.
Stelarc, thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks a lot and really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Circulating.